Tonight, once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latex gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
What's up, everybody? You know what that means. We're going to have a real good show tonight. I'm Daniel. Alongside with me is Big Blue. Blue, how you doing, my man?
Doing good, man. I'm doing good.
Unfortunately, you're not going to be joining me in the festivities here. No, you have to work tonight, right?
Yeah. Today's the start of my work week again. So,
ooh, well, I'll drink a few for you. But we have a special guest. He's been on the show before. You guys know him as True Crime Time. We also know him as True Crime Time because we don't know his real name either. But welcome to the show, Crime Time. How's it going?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. It's going good.
what's going on, man?
Friday night, so when you're going on DTS, you have to be prepared. So I did bring a beverage to drink with you, Daniel. So you won't be drinking alone.
Nice. Appreciate that. This is the I don't it's called the Drunk Turkey Show. However, it's very rare that we actually drink on the show. But on a Friday night, a work week is done. It's been a long week. I'm enjoying this one as well. So there was a hearing yesterday, a setting of the trial date, possibly. I mean, it's currently set for June 2nd, 2025. 3 months is where they're expecting it to be. 2 weeks of jury, 8 weeks of the actual court, and then 2 weeks of mitigation if Coburger is ended up found guilty. Mm-hmm. Are you surprised, Crime Time, about it being pushed out a year?
Not necessarily. The timing with the school being let out makes sense. So they probably could have pushed it in a little bit earlier if they really wanted to, but I think they're considering some of that with Latah County. And I do think there's still some work to do with discovery. So plenty of time to work it out, but the judge did set some pretty clear guidelines on what he expects with delivery and response. So I think that he said, in the hearing, there was little return with the arguments that are going on now, right? So I think he's kind of getting tired of hearing the defenses, all these requests and delays and things like that going on. So maybe they could have done it sooner, but I think they're trying to time it with also the community. Yeah,
that makes sense. Big Blue, what do you think, man? Do you think it's too far away? You think it's appropriate amount of time? Think it should have happened already?
I mean, I see it happen here all the time where it gets pushed back a couple years. So I think it's a good time. They were worried about, all the traffic and all the congestion is going to cause when it came to hotel booking and, the court case going on because of graduations. And, but I think in those northern states, they're mostly all done in May, the graduations, including the high school.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's possible.
So all that would be out of the way. I guarantee you all those hotels are already booked for a while, man. Mm-hmm. That's what happened last time. I remember we looked to maybe try to go for a trial date, one of the first ones, and it was all booked.
Yeah, and then it didn't even happen that time. Angel D comes in with a question saying, set a date for trial before change of venue. That's the way it works. You can't change the venue until there's a trial date set. That's the order in which the proceeding happens. That's why they had to put the trial date before that August change of venue date. But for you guys, what do you think? Do you think that it should stay in Latah County, or you think they should move it? Me personally, I'm not opposed to them moving it. I think that if he's guilty in Latah County, he's going to be guilty anywhere else. And, I don't think it matters if they move it, but, it is the right of the citizens of the community to make this decision. And so I'm a little bit torn between it. What do you guys think? What do you think, Blue? We'll start off with you. But before we say that, thank you, Christy, saying love you guys. Been around way longer. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I think if they get it all situated, and it's gonna go around the school schedules and everything, I think it's okay to get heard there. I know some people are saying about trying to give him more of a fair trial because it could be biased there, but I think everybody knows about this case, including people in other countries. So I think the evidence is there to commit him as guilty. Then I think it'd be good anywhere, man.
Yeah. What about you, Crime Time? Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think the evidence is strong enough. I'm not concerned if they did move it. But, it is supposed to be a jury of your peers, right? And what better location than College Row, where Bryan's, that's been a big part of his life. And those are the people that he impacted. So, I guess I could go either way, but I like the idea of it staying in Latah County. But if it were to go somewhere else, I'm not concerned. I think the evidence is there either way, and I have confidence in the jury as well. Coming to an agreement as a group, either way.
Yeah, my only, I guess, like I said, I'm not opposed to it, but my only argument against it as well is, well, what was the point of the gag order? The gag order was strict. Nobody's been able to talk. Nobody's been able to do anything so that there wouldn't be a tainted jury in the area. And, I understand that there's been a lot of speculation and stuff like that that's gone awry and a lot of theories and this, that, and the third. But those things, I'm not entirely sure outside of one guy in Pullman who's willing to do anything to prove Coburger's innocent. Outside of that guy, I'm not sure if that's the temperature of the area. You know what I mean? And if they're not on these channels they're watching that are these conspiracy type channels, keep it there. They probably know less information than what all these other folks that are watching the show. And I can tell you this based on our numbers, it's very low numbers that are actually in the Idaho area. Majority of our viewership comes from all over the place, major metropolitan cities across the United States and the world, to be honest with you. So I'm not entirely certain, those that are located in Moscow are eating up as much of this stuff that's out there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we follow it, right? So we're more in tune and it's part of our interest. Not everybody does. I've asked a lot of people, hey, have you heard of this case? And they're like, no, or they may have just briefly, but they don't know the details.
Yeah. I think with it being set from a year from now, there's going to be more bigger cases, more bigger things going on the next couple months. People are going to start forgetting a little bit of the details, forgetting a little bit of the stuff. And I think it'd be a fair case either way.
Yeah. It does, I think, favor the defense the longer it goes on.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, there's the possibility of the what was it called? The bus theory, where they hope somebody gets hit by a bus and they can't testify. Something like that. That's what you hope for by prolonging it for so long that somebody forgets something happens to somebody decides they don't want to testify. Something of that nature. That's your motivation behind it. Oh, wow. Thank you, Don. I'm hoping I'm saying this is the Jesus or for your $20 super sticker. We appreciate you. Thank you. Good deal.
Yeah, any play they have is good for them to try, even if it's a Hail Mary, pushing it out to delay. And remember in the hearing just the other day, Ann Taylor even when the judge was setting the dates, she was still kind of trying to hold on to the option to delay it a little bit more, right? With having time to respond and things like that, which makes sense. But I could just sense in the way she was talking how she was agreeing to the date, but right, there was a but at the end of that when she said, yeah, June 2nd. However, so I think that's part of their strategy, is to try to drag it out as long as they can. And that's what I think they have to do, because I don't think they have a lot pushing his innocence, right? So here's another year he's going to sit in jail, right? If he's innocent, he's just going to happily sit there for another year of his life in jail. Why aren't they saying, hey, he's got an alibi. We want to have a hearing for bail. We want to revisit that. And let's talk about setting bail for Bryan, because we've discovered this in the process of discovery from the prosecution. We've found this and this, so, because, a lot of the comments I've seen have talked about, brief things that Ann Taylor has said as if everything she says is true. But so if they have these things that are pointing to, I guess if they have this exculpatory evidence, why aren't they revisiting bail with Bryan and trying to get him out of jail for the next year?
It's a good point.
I think they know what they have on Bryan. The defense knows what they have. And now this is a challenge for them to defend him. Right. And that's their job. But I think they know, they've seen the evidence. They know. Right.
Yeah. I mean, they've gotten majority of the evidence. I think they claim there's a 2% that they don't have. And it's not necessarily that they don't have, it's more that they don't want to go and look for. They spoke about the green thumb drive that's in the police station with all the files. And those were all the pictures and all the things that she was inquiring about that really weren't important to the case. Right. And I know a lot of people say, oh, man, some of those are cameras on the road to the way. And I get that. Like, for instance, that Star Coffee place, it was further off the road off of 270. And it was, what do you call it? It had, there was a bank on one side, and there was a, something else,
the gas
station that were closer to the street that had better surveillance on either side. And so unless, some alien mothership came in here and swapped out Bryan Kohberger with the real killer for a while, maybe that's why his phone disconnected to the network. I don't know. He was in space. Unless that happened, and that Red Star Coffee place is the only camera that could have captured that, it doesn't make any sense that they feel that they're missing things. It's in there. It's just not to the quality or the need of what they're going to be utilizing in court. Similar to, like, for instance, the DNA profile of Michael Coburger, the father of Bryan Kohberger. They pulled trash out of his family home in efforts and hopes to try to get Bryan's DNA. They couldn't get Bryan's DNA. They had male DNA there, so they tested it. Ended up coming back Michael Coburger and the father of the suspect. Now, that gave them the warrant and everything so that they can go arrest him, which is one big piece of evidence that a lot of people claim there's no evidence about. But, that gave them the probable cause to arrest him. And then they got his DNA sample, and they matched his DNA, him being Bryan Kohberger, to the knife sheath. Now, prosecution doesn't need Michael Kohberger's DNA or any of those things.
Right.
It's irrelevant.
Yeah, that was the end game with the process, right? They use, it's part of the investigation, just like the IgG DNA, records that they searched. It was a clue in the process that they followed in order to get to identifying who Bryan was, and then from there they had to match it to the knife sheath. And it's legal, right, to go in and take somebody's trash, and they followed that process, and it was good investigation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't question the investigation at all either. But it just kind of boils down to, like, it's just the arguments that they've had are just, they're futile at best. But this is like, I've heard some folks crying, saying, whoa, they're saying that the PCA is irrelevant. Well, it is. They don't need Michael Kohberger's DNA anymore. They got Bryan's.
Right.
They may not need a lot of the stuff that they had in the PCA, because that information and that evidence that they had was prior to the arrest.
Yes.
there was so much more evidence and so much more to gather. I mean, it kind of reminds me, and this whole case does with a lot of people, and I don't care if I offend anybody either. You know, a lot of folks have this weird condition where they think that if they haven't seen it, it doesn't exist. Like, for instance, in Howard Bloom's book, the DoorDash apparently is from Burger King. It's not from Jack in the Box, but because somebody has seen a Jack in the Box bag with Xana's name on it, and I kept telling everybody, if DoorDash was a common thing for her, who's to say that DoorDash or that well, I assume it's a DoorDash order from Jack in the Box was from that night. They had a huge party the night before, and there was a lot of trash everywhere else from the night before. And so, you know, this is a symptom of that. Like, everybody focuses in on the one thing that they can see and kind of block out everything else. Like, I gotta see people say, I want to see, you know, the DNA sequence or this, or why doesn't the police show me this about the evidence or that about the evidence? And it's frustrating to see those type of things. It's insane. The thought process for some people.
Yeah, I agree. And even when I saw the Jack in the Box food there, it looks like a half drink, like iced coffee or something, you know, at 4 a.m. It could have been from the day before or even that morning or whenever.
Yeah, there's no telling. But dude, how crazy is that she bought something from BK, Burger King?
And it wouldn't surprise me really, because you know, we think we know a lot about the case, but we really don't, right? I think there's a lot more just in the PCA that we haven't seen. It's redacted heavily. So that's just one document, and how long that document is even after it's been redacted. And then you look at how much evidence they're talking about through this discovery process. If you're going to say there's no evidence, why is it taking so long for all of this evidence to get to the defense? You can't argue both ways. You can't say there's no evidence and then argue that the prosecution is hiding it. It's just a process. So it wouldn't take as long as it's taking if there wasn't a great deal of evidence to process and go through and turn over when the time is right. They're still working on things, right? They're still putting things together and waiting for results and building out what they're going to be using in the trial. And then as they do that, they'll hand it over.
No, I understand that. But to me, it's like I said, the bigger indication is how narrow-minded or how narrow-focused and tunnel vision, especially those who aren't trained or experienced in looking at something like this. You know what I mean? It's real easy to get narrow-minded, tunnel focus or whatever. But another big, and we'll get into the topic of today's, podcast being the evidence. The big indicator of narrow-minded tunnel vision is the fact that those people that say there's only one latent footprint, and not understanding that the PCA only references one footprint to corroborate what Dylan was saying, not that there was only one footprint. It doesn't say at all that they found, a latent footprint because they're, on the second try, because they didn't find anything else. Mm-hmm. Now we have to, here's what probably happened. There was probably a lot of non-latent, very visible footprints that they saw on the first day that they took pictures and collected. And then on the second day, they used the amino black to see what was underneath the footprints you could see, to see what you can't see. The footprints that after the blood had already started to come off of the shoe. So you can determine which direction he headed last. And since it was latent and it was in front of Dylan's room and it was heading towards the sliding glass door, that all corroborates what she saw. It doesn't mean there's only one print. It's frustrating. And
they're going to work from one area out, right? And so they may have started over there by Ethan and Xana's room and that's why when they go back again, it takes time to process all of those things. They don't just rush in and then just find it all immediately. They have to go through a process to identify it. So as they work their way out, they discovered it.
Yeah. And it goes down to also like the knife sheath, right? There's been a lot of folks that say, why did one officer see the knife sheath and not the other? And Why is it that he could see it from the door and all these things, right? And they folks try to put two and two together, saying, all right, that says that when viewed from the door, and making the wrong assumption that means that you could view it from the door, which is different when viewed from the door or being able to view something from the door. With that assumption, now think that the sheath never existed because only one cop saw it and one cop didn't. What do you think happened there? I'm not sure if we spoke about this last time, but what do you think happened with the knife sheath in that situation?
As far as how it got there?
No, when the PCA says when viewed from the door and how one officer, the lead investigating officer, saw it and how the non-leading investigator didn't.
I think that it's just him inserting the discovery of the knife sheath into the PCA and explaining how it was discovered. I don't think there's any deception happening here. This is just the terminology that was used to describe his observation of the knife sheath. And I think it's one of those things. I'd have to reference back to the PCA right now and read the exact word for word, but I think it's one of those things where you pick apart the words that were used, right, in order to try to say, oh, he only discovered it this way. That may not be the case. There's body cam footage from other officers on scene as well that there could be evidence of that were picked up. He's just referencing his observation in order to support the overall PCA. The PCA is this document that they're submitting, right, to tell what they have, right, and it's encompassing everything. And so I think it's just a descriptor, with what he saw.
What about you, Blue? What do you think happened that morning? What do you think the officer is trying to say in the PCA, and why it differs from the other officer who's had to come up with, in his probable cause, said that he was later told that there was a knife sheath underneath, to Mogen's right side?
I think it's just the perspective of the person. Maybe the other officer did notice and he didn't right away because he was looking at a different thing. When two people walk into the room, depending on their height, depending on what they're actually looking at, they're going to see different things first off. So maybe he walked into the room, he went to the left and the other guy went to the right. They're both investigating the same room. They're not going to be right behind each other. They can't see crap if they do that. They're going to have to split up and look for the evidence separately.
Yeah. So his actual his words here says says both Goncalves and Mogen were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogen's right side. So he's not necessarily saying it was missed anywhere. He's transitioning here, saying after observing the victims, he later noticed the knife sheath.
All right, so I'll tell you guys exactly what happened. So thank you, Sirius Black, for your $5 super chat, saying great to have TCT tonight. Awesome panel. And also Angel D came in with a $2 super chat saying shout out to Meg P. She misses her. We all miss her. All right, so here's what happened. We have to take in effect the entire picture, right? It's not just what's happening in that small sentence. We need to look at the entire picture. First and foremost, how big do you guys think that apartment, or that was 3 stories, but how wide and how big do you think those bedrooms were? How many square feet do you think it was? From my understanding, it was relatively tiny, ain't it?
Oh yeah, it's very small. It's 6-7 feet, I think, across. The bed almost butts up against the closet door.
So do you think that these guys were walking side by side up the stairs?
Right.
Okay, so they're walking one in front of the other. I would assume, forensic team was already there, that he's probably also getting being taken by a forensic escorted. Thank you, Blue. Up to that room. Now, would you guys agree that room would be a lot of evidence in?
Absolutely.
Would you also agree that you would try to limit the amount of people that are entering into that room?
Yeah.
And wouldn't you agree you would limit that to the main important people, such as the lead investigator and detective? And wouldn't you agree that his partner in a small room with a bunch of evidence It's probably not going to go inside the room. Now, when you look at the PCA, it says when viewed from the door, it's on Mogen's right side, when viewed from the door. It doesn't say that I was able to view the knife sheath from the door. It says that when you're standing from perspective from the door, it's on her right side. Now, we know a couple of things. We know that that Kaylee, apparently, according to her parents, was in the corner sitting up. That would let me believe that their feet was probably towards the door, their heads towards the wall. And for it to be on Maddie's, to the right side of Mogen, or to Mogen's right side, I don't know if she's laying on her side or maybe face down, but or face up. I couldn't tell you, but it would make a difference, wouldn't it? If she's facing down, her right side would be on one side. If she's facing up, her right side's on the other.
Right. Yeah. Or was he describing from the view being to the right?
Exactly. And I think that's what he was describing. So I know that, when you have folks that don't understand the process, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about those that think that the knife sheath wasn't there, right? When you don't understand the process and you don't know what's going on, you're going to look at this like, oh, why did that person see it and not that person? And jump to this wild conclusion that somebody had to have planted it. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Not the case at all. And so, but the knife sheath is a piece of evidence that we know that was put in. What else do you guys would consider being hard evidence against Bryan Kohberger in this case?
I think the eyewitness is going to be important. The physical description, and I think it's really possible that voices were heard, and they could even be describing voices, and if it matches Bryan, and who knows what else could be there as far as the forensic data on their phones. And I think another one I think is going to be very telling is going to be the blood spatter evidence from inside the bedrooms, especially those close quarters areas where they're going to be able to measure. They're going to know where the perpetrator was standing, right? They're going to know exactly where they were based off of the patterns, and they're going to be able to tell the order that everybody was attacked. So I think that's going to be a big part of them putting together their explanation of what they believe happened.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Blue? What other piece of evidence do you consider is really strong against Bryan Kohberger?
To me, it's going to be, the DNA on the knife sheath. That's the only big piece of DNA. The other one is going to be possibly that they haven't shown us is the evidence of the car being with some kind of footage of it. And it matching his car. As far as go ahead, Blue. I said, because we know that they can see it clearly doesn't have a front license plate. But does that image also maybe show the back of the car? But they couldn't read the license plate. Not they would have found them a lot sooner. But maybe they found more images afterwards.
Yeah, I think another thing that will be damning for Bryan is I do think there's going to be an online connection there, or some sort of connection to the victims, and I think that can be key, right? If now when you talk about the knife sheath and the DNA, some people want to argue that it's a movable object, and then there's the touch DNA argument and all of these things. But when you couple that with a connection to the victim, but whether even if it's just online, as simple as following them on Instagram or something, that now is another connection, right, to them, and it's another thing you have to explain away that just tells the big picture. And that's the key with the evidence is when you talk about one piece of evidence, you can kind of argue against every single piece individually. And that's really the defense's strategy. That's what they want to do. They want to break it all down individually so that they can cast doubt on every, they want doubt on the video footage, doubt on the cell phone pings, doubt on the DNA. Oh, it's just touch DNA, doubt on how the knife sheath got there. So all of those things add up for them in their kind of spider web of evidence that they're trying to prove. But we have to look at, everything together as a whole against Bryan. So, go ahead. So a connection through the online application, I think would be really hard for the defense to overcome.
I think one of the other things that could be a little bit more damning too is a lot of people don't believe it exists, but the Amazon receipt that he bought that knife.
Yeah. That's going to be damning. There's a lot of stuff. I think it's the collection of the evidence, right? And it's because this is a circumstantial case, and most cases are. But I don't understand where this thought that a circumstantial case is weak. Like, for instance, if you lived in the wintertime and you went to sleep and it was cold, but there was no snow, and you woke up the next morning, it was cold and there was snow in your car, but you didn't see it snow. You can, using common sense, you can put two and two together, and you don't have direct evidence of snow, that it was snowing. You can say that it snowed. And so in this case here, there's just so much that would make his story not reasonable. I don't think there is a reasonable story out there for Bryan Kohberger that would explain all the evidence. And that's where we get to the point where, is it beyond reasonable doubt? I think some folks are confused about the difference between beyond reasonable doubt and beyond all doubt. There's two different scenarios here, right? And we'd have to look at a few things. We'd have to look at, all right, how was this crime committed? It was silent. There was no sounds that we know of from the killer, from an audio 50 feet away. Now, it heard whimpers, it heard voices, it heard a thud, a dog barking. Didn't hear anybody yelling in anger, any of those things. Didn't hear anybody also fighting for their life or screaming. You know what I'm saying? So whoever committed this crime went in there, killed 4 people with a knife. I mean, you have to understand how close in proximity you have to be to that person to kill them with a knife. And not only do it once, but 4 times, and not leave your DNA behind. Not a sweat, not hair, not an eyelash, an eyebrow hair. And he had bushy eyebrows, right? Which made me wonder. And I saw this thing a couple of weeks ago. There was this person that did something to their eyebrows. They put some kind of gel in them, and they look really thick, like abnormally thick. And I was like, man, I wonder if Bryan Kohberger put something on his eyebrows so they wouldn't fall out, during the commission of the crime. It'd stay, maybe gel or whatever. And that gave it the appearance of like they were really bushy eyebrows. Well, I'll backtrack. So whoever committed this crime did so without leaving DNA behind. Now, I know and understand they left it on the knife sheath, but I'm talking about on the bodies, of the victims. And somebody who committed that crime would have to be very knowledgeable, probably in forensics and how to not leave your DNA behind, how to not get your DNA, take a scene with you. You know what I'm saying? So you look at who are the other suspects. You have fraternity guy that's roid raging, out of control. He ain't gonna go kill 4 people silently without leaving your DNA behind. Ex-boyfriend that's been drinking that night, was at the corner club, love struck and mad and angry because his girlfriend's leaving him, going to Texas. No DNA behind is usually not a result of that. So does Bryan Kohberger have the skills or the training needed? And I think that the answer is yes, he does. Now, the other thing that I had brought up about him last time, and somebody brought this up in the comment section, so I want to bring it up here, is I talked about how Bryan Kohberger wrote on several platforms that he had struggled with remorse, struggled with feelings. He considered himself an organic bag of meat or whatever, sack of meat. And that's how he viewed other people. And I said, the person that committed this crime probably had those feelings. And somebody said, I know a lot of people who struggled with that and didn't turn into a mass murderer. And my argument to that is, well, when I was in law enforcement, prior to me hurting my back, I was going through the process to become a ICE agent for customs. And in the process, you have to take a cognitive test. And the examples that they give you are, and I can't remember the answer or the question, but it was something to the effect like, everybody in the Border Patrol speaks Spanish, but not everybody that speaks Spanish is a Border Patrol agent. So what I'm saying is that whoever committed this crime probably suffered from lack of feelings and remorse, but that doesn't mean that everybody that struggles with that is going to turn into mass murder. I hope that makes sense. So I just wanted to throw that out, but you have so much circumstantial evidence. His phone being off during the murders, his DNA in the house, somebody that matches his description inside the house. You know, that person's driving a vehicle that matches his vehicle. In that house is his DNA on a sheath. And it's just, what reasonable story is there that you can come up with? Play devil's advocate, crime time. What reasonable story could you come up with that answers the sheath, the DNA, the car, him, his phone off, everything?
You know, I don't know if I have a reasonable story. I would say, yeah, I don't even think I could explain it away. You would have to, the knife sheath alone, you know, his DNA being on the knife sheath, you have to find a way to challenge the validity of the results, right? The testing, whether it's incompetence from whoever processed it, or, you know, it's got to be one of two things, right? If you have a knife sheath with DNA and it matches his DNA, it's either corruption from law enforcement, they're framing him, and it's this big conspiracy against Bryan Kohberger, which I don't believe, or it's error, right? It's incompetence in the way they're processing it, and somehow it's come back and matched Bryan Kohberger. And I don't think either argument is very valid, right? So having his DNA at the scene is damning. Really, the only thing is, you know, if there were some record of him or some way they might want to try to say that, you know, he sold a knife to somebody at some point and then it ended up there. I mean, that's a stretch. I don't really see how you can explain that away. And I think that's why they're trying to get ahead of the DNA with the defense's strategy. And they're trying to find misconduct from law enforcement in order to so they can file motions to suppress, right, some of the evidence that they want to submit. And so if they can attack the way it was tested or the way it was handled or processed, that's their best bet. I honestly cannot think of a way to explain how your DNA is on a knife sheath. It's one thing if your DNA is on the back of a chair in the house and you could say, well, yeah, he before he moved there, he visited the house when it was vacant, or he went there once for a party or whatever. But the fact that it's directly tied to the crime and how the crime occurred that's bigger evidence than just DNA at the scene.
Yeah, no, I agree. What about you, Blue? What is your devil advocate story for Bryan Kohberger? And thank you, Florence White, for your 1999 super chat, man. We appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thank you, guys. So, like you said, I always have the theory is like maybe he picked it up like at a pawn shop, swap meet, to take a look at it. He's interested. He had one at home and it looked like his. You know, and he picked it up, and maybe that's where he got his DNA from the button when he opened it that time. But they would have found other people's DNA if it was, you know, same situation, because those buttons are hard to pop open. You know, just like if you go, if I get tied to a crime, or they find a 44 Magnum Rossi, my fingerprint on the, on the trigger because I was just handling one at the pawn shop yesterday because I was taking a look at it. They were ridiculous on the price, but I my fingerprints are all over because I like those guns. There's a polished chrome Rossi. I've been looking for a 44 Magnum polished chrome, but it was $990, which brand new they're like 13 when they used to be only 400. Maybe like 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'd say that you can say that story that he picked it up somewhere.
Yeah, but what are the chances? And this is where the reasonable aspect comes in. Is it reasonable to believe that the person that ended up buying that knife and knife sheath from the place that Bryan Kohberger picked up also matched his height and weight, also drove a vehicle very similar to his, also knew or just so happened to get lucky to be out at 4 a.m. committing this crime while he is out of service at this odd hour, middle of the night. It's not just 4 a.m. It's from 2:47 to 4:48. Out there in this freezing, foggy, overcast night. Like none of anything that he's saying makes zero sense. He has no corroborating evidence for his Wawa Park alibi, if you want to call it that. There's a lot of evidence that's saying that he was over there committing the murders. They have video of the car, picture or video of a witness that doesn't exclude him, his DNA in the house, his phone off during the time. And probably more than we know. You included the receipt for the K-bar knife, and I know they had a receipt for the Dickies clothing that they suspect he wore during the commission of the crime. All those things pile up. There's just no way possible that all those things happen reasonably out of somebody picking up the knife that Bryan Kohberger did. The likelihood would be impossible. I mean, I think there's a better chance that somebody else has Bryan Kohberger's DNA. What was it, 5 octillion million times than all those things lining up on the same night.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that they mentioned he was out driving around, I mean, that's just odd to me. That you have all of these things against him, pointing to him already, and they're going to admit he was out driving around. It's just another coincidence, right? It doesn't make sense to me. I think they would have been better off if they had said he was home or something, unless you're going to show evidence that he was driving around in another location, which they don't have. That would be exculpatory evidence, right? If they just had him on camera at the time of the murders over by Wawa Park, he's good to go, right? He'd be out of jail in 6 days.
Yeah. But at least on bond. Yep. Yeah.
The other piece too is a grand jury saw the evidence. That's a lot of, we forget that, right? When people say, well, guilty until, or innocent until proven guilty. And, he's sitting in jail with no bail for a reason, because they have very strong evidence to hold him there that a grand jury, reviewed, and they agreed that there's enough evidence there to indict him. So people who claim there's no evidence, that doesn't make sense. Our legal process is telling us that there is evidence there.
Yeah, it's just because love is blind, and when you love someone, you can't see everything in front of you. I mean,
and sometimes I get it. Some people want to go against the grain, and try to argue the other side. I think there's people who enjoy doing that, kind of enjoy playing devil's advocate and say, he's innocent. So it's a mix. I still haven't heard a compelling theory on him being innocent on any of the evidence. We've all heard the same thing, that it's touch DNA and cell phone stuff. Apparently none of the evidence that they have is valid, according to the people who think every single piece of it is invalid. It's just, how does that happen? How could every single piece of evidence, the video footage, the cell phone pings, the DNA, none of it is legit?
Oh, have you heard that the reason why WSU was kicking him out, because they hated him too? That it's because he apparently, and this was from somebody, Mitch girl, I think is what her name was. She had sent me an email saying, the reason why they were kicking Bryan out was because they didn't like him, because somebody saw him look at a LGBTQ poster odd, and they assumed that he had anti-LGBTQ tendencies, so they needed to get rid of him. And they caused him to fight the professor and everybody else. Nobody liked him. And, he's getting attacked from WSU police, Pullman police, WSU's campus, the Moscow police department. They just don't like him. This guy that nobody's ever heard of in that area before August of 2022.
What do you think he was arguing with his professor about?
I think it was his method of teaching. Like maybe he at first he was being too strict on everybody. Like one of the students had mentioned that he was grading unfairly, and maybe he thought he wasn't.
So maybe the professor kind of confronting Bryan and saying, hey, you know, you need to back off a little bit, or, you know, and then they disagreed and it escalated from there. I could see that for sure happening.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the story goes that he was being aggressive. He was know-it-all and was very, what was the word that they had used? He treated especially women differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And it seems like he's had a problem for a long time. I mean, you know, a lot of people say, oh, man, he was this perfect guy growing up, PhD student, never did anything wrong. Man, you look at his past and his history and the things that his father told his relatives and they told their friends about their relationship or what they knew about Bryan Kohberger growing up too. I mean, the kid was out of control.
Yeah.
You know, he was a heroin addict. He had, you know, multiple friends that he, or multiple people that he used.
Mm-hmm.
Like to go get, you know, without their knowledge, to get drugs and things of that nature. He stole his sister's phone. He had, I think he was telling somebody he was clean with blood coming down his arm. It's interesting, man. And in the book, according to Howard Bloom, and again, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because you know, he didn't talk to Michael Coburger, at least from my understanding, from what I read in the book. It sounds like he got this information from friends or relatives of Michael Coburger, or friends of Michael and Bryan Kohberger's family members.
Yeah, because he is also on a gag order, so I would say he would never admit to talking to him, even if he did.
Yeah, that's true. And he may be calling these people friends of relatives, and it may actually be relatives. You know what I'm saying? I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not saying that that's the issue there. But yeah, he had problems early on. I think Sasha says it right here. Said it seems like he had trouble. His TA job started quickly. Didn't it start in September? I mean, school starts late August or early September. That was quick. That was exactly it. It was immediately. You know, he was on plans or on their radars in September, had issues going in October, November, and in December, every single month.
Yeah, it didn't take him long at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have John Doe, who is one of those possible, you know, blind, says the school fired him because him being a CIS white male that wouldn't give freebie grades to morons. You know who the moron is? The person that took their phone with them to go commit a murder and turn it on during that night. The person that left the sheath on the bed. You know, the person that took his own car. I hear that a lot. Person that took his own car to the murder scene. You know,
what option did he have, though? Do you think? I mean, you know, was he going to rent a car? Borrow a car? He had another option.
Trust me, I've beaten that like a dead horse. But what I'm saying is, he did take his own car, and all these people think that those are dumb mistakes. And instead of saying, why would he make those dumb mistakes, you should be asking yourself, why am I questioning the police catching somebody for making so many dumb mistakes? Am I wrong here? Am I wrong?
Well, what it is they try to rationalize Bryan as if he's thinking rationally in this process. And you made a point earlier about how, you know, most people can cope with things in their life, and there's a small percentage of people who commit murder, right? And it goes to the next level. So it's the same idea where he's not thinking like a normal person. And I believe that he was, I think it's really possible he was under the influence of something. It could have been a prescription that he was abusing. It could be something else, but I don't think he was thinking clearly with everything kind of spiraling out of control in his life. And I think there was a lot of anger and rage built up, and he had decided he was going to do it regardless. And I think there was a thought process there, but I think in the midst of it happening, you hear a lot of times about people who commit crimes will black out, or, you know, and things like that. So you're not necessarily thinking perfectly, and he may not have expected, you know, the adrenaline rush, and obviously may not have expected encountering somebody in Maddie's room. You know, you can break down that whole thing and how it kind of, you know, fell apart, and he could have made mistakes. But it doesn't make sense to try to rationalize a psychopath's thought process, right? Somebody who's going to go in and murder 4 people. They're not necessarily thinking clearly. So I can see them making mistakes. And I think, it's one of the most interesting things to me is trying to figure out is, who was his target? Was it multiple people, one person? And kind of what was his mindset going in? Because that could potentially explain a lot as far as why certain things were done the way they were. If what was that trigger for him?
He wrote in his memoirs, or whatever you want to call it, in his writings, that he had grand illusion or grand, I can't remember what it was, grand illusions or whatever. And he talked about being, this detective that's going to solve high profile crimes. And it seemed like that was going out the door. I think this was the ultimate. I wanted to prove that I'm smarter than everybody. And unfortunately, apparently he's not. And so Iona Pear says, yeah, second, third hand info. I'd be pissed off if I were the Coburgers learning their friends spilled if gossip was true. Here's the thing. Do you think that the information that is out in Howard Bloom's book is favorable towards Bryan Kohberger? Would you say yes or no? Crime Time, what would you think?
I haven't read it, but I would say no.
Okay, it says there that the family suspected him of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were his parents and there was a book like this and you truly believed that your son was innocent, wouldn't you make a comment when asked about it, referencing how it's bullcrap? He's innocent until proven guilty. Why stay quiet on something that makes your son look bad, or your brother, if you're the sisters, and you believe in his innocence?
Yeah, and just the lack of presence in general of support at these hearings. I can tell you that if my son were sitting on trial for murder for the death penalty, and I believed he was innocent in my heart, I don't care if I lived across the country, I would be there supporting that person, right? If you truly believe that, your child was innocent, not to mention they're locked up in jail, and that's an opportunity for you to be 10 feet away from them, in the same room and see them. The fact that they're not even showing up to these hearings, I think is very telling. And I agree with you that they know. I think they're aware of a lot more than what we're aware of with Bryan's past. We talk about what we've heard about and things secondhand, but they know, right? So it's probably even more impactful for them. But I just think I agree with you. I think the fact that they're not supporting Bryan more, they're not being more vocal, is very telling. Sometimes what you don't say, right, is even more telling.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Blue?
I think I would agree with true crime. I would be there if it was my daughter, my son. I only have daughters, so I would be there if they were accused of some kind of horrible crime like this. And I mean, you see it in the Netflix movie for Jeffrey Dahmer. His dad was there behind his back, even though he found out what his son was doing. And he still supported him because that was his son. I have to jump off here in a minute. Oh, sorry. I said I have to jump off here in a minute, but Daniel said he had something from the book that was really important.
I already talked about it. I talked about it. It was the Burger King DoorDash order.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was like, that was to me, that was something that shows how tunnel vision we can become. We saw the Jack in the Box bag, and everybody assumed that what Xana ordered was Jack in the Box because that's what we could see. Not coming to the thought or even process the possibility that could have been from the day before, and what she ordered was something differently. So,
yeah. Gotcha. You see, and everybody was wondering where you got that information from in the live chat earlier, and I was like, I don't know where you got it from. But, okay.
I was listening. I haven't read it myself. I was listening to one of these podcasts that he was on, maybe Nancy Grace, maybe one of the other ones, and it came up that it was a Burger King DoorDash order. So interesting. But thank you, Blue, for joining us, man. We appreciate you, dude. You have a safe night, buddy.
Nice to see you, Daniel. Thank you, Crime Time, for coming on. And I'll see you guys next time. And everybody, I wish I can play a piano like that. It's a hologram. You see. I can go through it.
Going back to this though, and I know people are saying that he maybe couldn't afford, this family can't afford to go all the way cross country and stuff. I get it, 100%. But in their own statement, they said that they believe, or they want to wait for evidence and believe in this presumption of innocence. And they also said something to the effect that they have fully cooperated with law enforcement. So those are the two statements that popped out to me. There's been a lot of rumors and speculation that they have come forward with some information about Bryan Kohberger and what they know. And if that ends up being the case, if we've come once we get the witness list and the prosecution has Coburger family as witnesses for the prosecution, how do you think that's going to go over for those that are in this, mindset that he's innocent?
Well, and remember, you mentioned the parents and what they know. There was that subpoena in Pennsylvania where they called the parents in. I think, everybody was kind of jumping to that Dana Smithers case, and I don't think that doesn't make sense to me. The connection there, it doesn't fit, right? The going into somebody's house and attacking. This is, they found the person outside, kind of dumped somewhere, and that doesn't necessarily fit.
She wasn't inside. She left the house.
That's what I mean. They found her outside is what I mean. They found her, off the side of the road. That's not his MO, right? Abducting a woman and dumping her. But
we don't know really what his MO is. I mean, if this was his first time offense, and I'll say this, there's a lot of thought in the investigation that there really was only one target, and that the goal was something to the effect of creating a huge mystery, so to speak, that, hey, you have all these people living in this house, one person gets stabbed to death in the middle of the night, nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
And they didn't work out that way for him. I think Kaylee ended up spoiling that. That created a domino effect of noise and people awake and stuff that ended up foiling what he wanted to do.
Yeah. When I look at the Dana Smithers connection, I'm not sure, right? I'm not sold necessarily, just for those reasons. The fact that it's just a completely different type of crime, different type of target, age-wise, right? And so but when you talk about the subpoena, I think it's more likely that subpoena was in relation to the case in Idaho, not necessarily that they were asking the parents of Bryan about the Dana Smithers case. I think it could have definitely been in regards to what they knew about Bryan and even what Bryan's dad may have witnessed on that trip back. Because remember, he flew out there to meet up with Bryan. They take a completely different route. They say they were trying to avoid weather. They're completely in sync, right? When they get pulled over, they've got their story lined up. They're working. I think Bryan's dad knew a lot more, to your point, and I think they could have been asking them about what they knew and maybe some.
Well, I talked to somebody that knows Dana Smithers' sister, and it was definitely in reference to Bryan Kohberger. However, he wasn't in the area during the time, and I think that's what they were testifying to. So I don't know, you're mute there. Yeah. So
I don't know. So.
No, it was definitely referencing Bryan Kohberger's possible involvement, but he was already in Moscow, I believe, by the time that her disappearance had occurred. So
why would the law enforcement say there's no, they were kind of initially saying there's no connection right off the bat before the testimony.
Maybe they knew her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't live too far. The other thing is he was a heroin addict. She was a heroin addict. Maybe they suspected somebody that Bryan Kohberger knew also that they thought could be a suspect in this.
Yeah.
Maybe one of his connections when he was doing heroin. Distance not far. They didn't, like I said, there wasn't a situation where it ended up being that they were questioning him hard. He had this time he had an alibi. He came forward with that one real quick, that he wasn't there. Right. So, that happened. He wasn't there. I think he was in Pullman already, or in the Moscow area. by the time she disappeared. I think her disappearance was like late.
Like May 28th. May 28th, I thought, right before he moved. I think she was last seen, I think, the 28th of May.
Maybe you're right.
Yeah, I think that's around when it was.
But he had an alibi, supposedly. A strong one, too. I mean, hopefully it's a lot stronger than he was staring at the stars.
Yeah. Out for a drive.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, too, right? They were quickly able to provide an alibi in that case.
There's another case, I couldn't tell you the name, but I read about recently where a guy, it was almost identical to Bryan's situation, but this guy was accused of stalking his girlfriend, and they had used his cell phone data to arrest him, and they even had a white car on camera in the area. It's, same thing. And he got with his lawyers, and he said that he was innocent and he was in another location, and they needed to double check the data. And it took him 6 days, and he was set free. So when you have a legit alibi and you are legitimately not the person who committed the crime, your lawyers are going to bring those things up, and it's not going to take them long to validate your story, right?
Yeah.
And prove that you're innocent. You're definitely not going to be content with sitting in jail for 3 years, being an innocent person, not once bringing up, let's revisit, bail to get me out of here. I mean, not pushing harder with your alibi and saying, wait a minute, I was over here. It's a joke to me, the fact that just the behavior and the way it's obvious that they have a strong case against Bryan. You don't sit in jail with no bail for 3 years without solid evidence against you, and your attorneys can't do anything about it to get you out. They haven't even brought it up because they know it's not happening.
It's true. You're absolutely right, man. I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head on all those things. There's a question for you in the live chat. Guys, if you have any questions at this time, put the stars in or super chats. We'll be able to answer those. Also, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. We'd appreciate the support. Nina says, TCT question. Have you looked into Ashley Flugel at all?
I have not. One of the things I need to do is try to find more time to look into more cases. So I'm working on that. I am so obsessed with this case.
You know who that is, right?
I haven't even been following that case. No, to be honest. Which one?
That's Bryan Kohberger's ex-girlfriend.
Oh, yeah. So
the one that overdose.
Yeah, I read about it a little bit. I would need to see more. I get the connection there. You can even talk about appearance with Xana and her, and it is strange that you would have this much death around Bryan. Unfortunately though, I think people who do use heroin are very prone to having those things happen. And so it's not necessarily out of the realm of just kind of being a coincidence. I think I would have to see more there. To me, the way that this crime happened and what I believe are some of the motives behind the crime are different, for example, than a situation like that. Unless, Bryan were to get angry and, strangle her and then cover it up somehow or something like that, or cause her to overdose. But that's a completely different type of crime than what we see with the Idaho case. And so I haven't been, I guess, compelled on that connection, although I do think it's interesting and just kind of another unusual thing about Bryan Kohberger in general.
Yeah, I mean, there might not be a lot to it. It's odd. There's some odd connections there, but this was when she passed. I think it was after he had already cleaned up. He had cleaned up and was, changing his life, being a better Bryan Kohberger. I can see a guy who thinks he's better than people, seeing somebody that he used to hang out with in a situation of, maybe being passed out, maybe taking advantage of that type of situation. I mean, we have heard from other people that were his friends that when he lost weight, he became a bully towards them.
Right.
He took advantage of them once he became, started doing kickboxing, losing weight, gaining confidence, apparently, whatever. Those things. So I can see somebody with that type of attitude. And I mean, obviously knowing what he's been alleged to have committed later on, I wouldn't be a surprise if somebody who was willing to kill 4 people, if they saw they were better than someone and saw somebody doing something that they used to do that they overcame, maybe adding a little extra something to that.
Yeah.
Nina,
Matt, go ahead.
Go ahead. Nina Drew comes in with a $2.99 super sticker. Thank you, Nina. What were you going to say, my man?
I was going to say, it's just imagine that if that were connected, and look at that. You have that incident with Bryan, and then you have the situation when he was a security guard with an emergency and somebody almost losing their life there. And then you have the Idaho 4 situation. I mean, he's just surrounded. If he were connected to that and the Dana Smithers case, I mean, that would be crazy, right? Just all of those things kind of coming together.
As I said, it's not strange to me. I've been around a lot of death in the last 5 years. ESPC. No, I get it, but I mean, have you been accused of killing anybody? Is any of the people that you've been around died under suspicious circumstances? Do you have a past where you wrote about things such as having struggles with feelings and remorse and looking at people as a sack of organic meat instead of people? Feeling that you can do anything you want to them with little to no remorse. I mean, if you followed those type of things and you suffered some of the things that Bryan Kohberger has, then, I get your comparison to a certain extent. Again, it's not necessarily, like I said earlier, everybody that speaks Spanish isn't a Border Patrol agent. Everybody that has had death around them doesn't typically turn like this. Right. And, him having death around him is definitely under a different circumstance.
Yeah, somebody had commented on one of my videos and they said, Bryan's, innocent, and he said, there was a body found in the projects, and he said, do I now have to prove that I didn't commit the murder? And obviously no. However, the question is, was your DNA found on the knife sheath under the body of that body? Well, if that's the case, then yeah, you probably should explain where you were that night. Right. So there's a difference of, he's innocent. You can't just say that this evidence, he doesn't have to prove his innocence per se. Right. But to some extent, the reality is you do in a basic way, right? It's very simple if you are innocent, if you weren't there, for example, or if it wasn't you. So in his example, this random body in the project, it'd be very easy for him to explain away that he wasn't there and it's not his DNA because he didn't do it. In this case, it's very hard for Bryan to explain away all of this evidence because he did it.
Yeah, and to go along with that, a lot of people will say something to the effect like, him driving around and that being his alibi is just as good as me saying I was asleep at home. And that's not the case, because I was asleep at home says where you were during the time in which you're suspected, and it's possibly provable given security cameras of today's technology in the area. Right. Is there a camera in this street, on this street, and on these intersections that should have caught his vehicle had he left? And if they don't catch him leaving that specific area, then he's probably telling you the truth. Now, he's not saying where he was at a specific time or a specific place. Big difference, huge difference. Yeah. Ozzy says, anyone does remember when the boots on the ground YouTuber went to the Jack in the Box and asked the worker what happened, and he confirmed that they made Xana's order and the DD was female. They also said that Bryan Kohberger visited Jack in the Box often and ate cheeseburgers there after him being a vegan.
So funny story. I actually called that Jack in the Box, over a year ago, because I was at the time looking into the rumor that Bryan could have been the DoorDash driver. And so I was trying to validate that. And I just called Jack in the Box directly and I asked them if Bryan Kohberger had ever come there at any time as a DoorDash driver. And they said no, they'd never seen him coming as a DoorDash driver. Obviously, I don't believe he was, but at the time, that was one of the rumors that was flying around. It's funny that other people are reaching out to that. They're probably sick of people calling him at Jack in the Box asking about Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah, and they're probably like, man, nobody even came that night.
Yeah. We should have been calling Burger King.
Oh man, this one's funny. So John Doe says, what I think is stupid is when somebody commits on argumentium and ignore whatever logical fallacy by presuming that since there's no evidence of where Bryan Kohberger's phone was, it must have been at the crime scene. I mean, there's the same thing in Go that just assuming that, you know, you don't know where his phone was, that you think he wasn't at the crime scene. You know, the fact that he doesn't have his phone on, and then you have his DNA at the crime scene, a video of his vehicle outside of the house, a description of somebody inside the house that doesn't exclude him, and the purchase of a knife sheath by him, also the purchase of Dickie clothing gear, both which can't be found. I think that kind of adds to your ignorant story that you have right here, Mr. John Doe.
Well, not to mention, it is a known fact that people will turn off their phones when they're committing crimes. That people do that. That's a documented thing that they've seen in past crimes, that people will do that. And it's even mentioned in the PCA, in their explanation is to their reasoning behind why Bryan would have turned off the phone. And once again, that PCA is in order to get the warrants to get the DNA. That's the real evidence. This was just one piece leading to that, getting to that point.
Right. Thank you, Sissy, for gifting a Drunk Turkey Show membership. Make sure, guys, if you want to become a member, hit that join button. Also turn on your gifts. We'll be doing a members only live probably this Sunday. You don't want to miss it. So please hit that membership button. We're going to ask, why would they not have DNA under the girl's fingernails since they fought back? Well, first and foremost, if there was DNA under the fingernails, I'm sure that they would have used that DNA versus the DNA on the sheath, right? That would have been more, would have been harder evidence to prove, for the defense, right? That, hey, how did his DNA get underneath the fingernails of X amount of victims too, right? There's a camera that is not too far away from the house that picks up dogs barking from the third floor. So it can pick up third floor noise. It also picks up a thud and whimpers and voices. And we can assume that those things are happening on the second floor. It doesn't pick up the sounds of anybody screaming or fighting back or doing any of those things that one would assume, which tells me that the most likely thing that happened that night is when he entered the third floor bedroom, he took out probably Maddie first, with precision, I would assume, probably. Right. I don't know where she was facing or whatnot. It sounds from the coroner, it said in the torso. You stab somebody in the torso, you hit them in the lung, they're not going to scream. You might hear some gurgles because they're going to start to, blood gets in the throat. And I think at that point you probably do have Kaylee waking up. And he doesn't have the I don't want to say the luxury, but he doesn't have the luxury of her being still and asleep anymore. So he has to attack her violently to make sure that she doesn't scream or alert anybody else in the house, which is why she has more wounds than anybody else up there.
I think that people underestimate also the brutality of a knife attack like this and how hard it is to defend. When you say they fought back, they may have put effort into fighting back, but Kaylee was not a big, fighter type person. Neither was Kaylee, Maddie, Xana. None of them were the fighter types. And when you're talking about somebody as big as Bryan, who would be holding a combat knife, when you say they fought back, there's I think some people imagine this kind of struggle like you would see in a movie, and this back and forth. This would have been extremely one-sided and quick. This knife is long enough to pierce not only through one side, but to come out the other side as well, especially if somebody's laying down in the bed. And so this, when we say fought back, I don't think there was much of a necessarily effective fight back. And then you talk about Bryan was most likely covering his body with long sleeves and gloves and to some extent. So there's going to be less chance of them being able to scratch him. And I think we would imagine maybe reaching up to scratch his face or something like that. People grossly underestimate the severity of a knife attack. In one of my video, I did post a brief clip of how quickly somebody can bleed out from an attack like that. So imagine somebody stabbing somebody multiple times, how quickly they would be incapacitated. So, when we think fought back, I think it's more of maybe struggled more versus
Man,
actually fought back.
what are you talking about, bro? Haven't you seen Michael Myers or Jason? It takes like multiple stabbings, and people can continue to walk and scream and yell. I mean, that's the extent of the experience some of the folks have that are commenting on this.
Mm-hmm.
No, I completely agree, man. You know, a knife is a very quick weapon that can really subdue somebody very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've seen things, crime scene stuff like that tell me what may have occurred in certain parts in certain places, and I don't see any way, based on what I've seen, that anybody fought back to the nature in which people are assuming. Now, what was said was that there was defensive wounds. Now, defensive wounds don't mean that the person was defending themselves by fighting back. Defensive wounds could merely be somebody putting their arm to cover their face and a knife hit
Or
their
even your hand, you know.
Yeah. Or, you know, if they go like this and then, you know, there's knife cuts to their arms, that tells you this person was trying to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people get confused when they hear defensive wounds with, you know, the fact that they fought back. And that may not be the case. Now, I know that Steve has come out saying that there must have been a battle on the second floor and this, that, and the third. I don't see that. Not necessarily. I don't think he's lying or anything. I think he's just, I don't know if he knows, but you know, there's audio 50 feet away. It would have picked that up if there was a fight, like what you're.
And having fight within you is, you know, like I said, I think there could have very well been effort, right? Kaylee may have had the attitude, but you know, she would have just been overcome. Is the reality.
Yeah, no, that's true. Sue Joy says, wonder if a trophy was found in BK's possession. Well, you know, here's the thing. Do you think that the defense at this point, I'll ask you, Crime Time, do you think the defense at this point would argue things that would show negative against Bryan Kohberger, that they have no leg to stand on?
No, they're not ready for that yet.
They're never gonna say that's there. The only thing that they're gonna argue are things that they think they can win right now, right?
Yeah, this is early, right? They're very aware that they're having open hearings. Remember, earlier on, they were wanting everything to be sealed, and then they kind of had this change of heart and wanted things to be open, and that was a strategic move, right? They know people are watching. Mm-hmm.
To a certain extent, they've come forward with some of the things that they want known. One of the things they don't want known is apparently some evidence that the prosecution has and plan to use, and they know about it. You know, they don't want that out there. And they even looked at the prosecution like, you know what we're talking about.
Yep.
Well, say it. No, they ask for, you know, sealed things for things that obviously don't look good in his favor. So is there a possibility that there was some sort of trophy? Maybe. I mean, what did we hear? We heard that there was ID cards found in a glove inside of a box. That sounds weird. And after that, there was speculation that he had broken into a female's apartment complex at one point, moved some things around. Mm-hmm. And then she went to him to install, security cameras inside the house. And then he ended up giving himself access to those security cameras and was watching this person. Now, they didn't come up with the, I would assume that, and maybe it is there. Wouldn't that be crazy if that's one of the things that got him fired from WSU?
The stalking?
Not just stalking, but the fact that he was watching somebody inside their apartment complex.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he would get fired for that. But I mean, if there were, but from what I read in the letter from his professor, it sounds like it's more related to professionalism and confrontation there. And then I think there could be some incidents that have happened with students as well that could have initiated kind of that confrontation, right? With a conversation about how he's treating and talking to students. I had heard at one point they even had Bryan stand up in front of the class and they all kind of had it out with him, right, about the way he was grading. So imagine, Bryan is being confronted by the entire group of students that he's trying to fit in with, and they're calling him out,
I don't think it was degrading. I think what it was, I'm familiar with what you're saying. It wasn't grading. It was, they were giving those students he graded poorly an opportunity to increase their grade by having this debate, all of them against Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah. So and they said that it was kind of in good spirits or whatever, but it kind of tells you the disconnect that Bryan had with his peers at the school and what was going on at the time. So
yeah, and like I said, there was also the rumors that it's not just what he did with his professor. There was supposedly a man, what was it? Somebody, I think his PhDs, one of the PhD students had made some accusations against him, following her, things of that nature. Cornering her inside of his office, not necessarily closing the door and trapping her there, but when she would go in, he would sit between her and the door. And she ended up being somebody of, I believe she's of Asian descent. I know that there's been a lot of speculation that's out there that Bryan Kohberger had a girlfriend who was Asian, and I think that may have been a girl he knew, and he didn't know how to control himself and ended up crossing some lines with her too.
Yeah, and you hear multiple stories like this, right? So you hear about that Tinder date he went on, you hear about this interaction, you hear about interactions with female students when he was in high school, you hear about it in college. So you see this pattern there, and it's, even if one of these rumors or one of these things isn't true, it's possible, right? Maybe not all of them, but you're hearing a theme here going on. You're not hearing a lot of people coming out saying, no, Bryan's a great guy. He comes over every Saturday and helps my grandma, reads to my grandma. Nobody's coming out and saying, as far as character witnesses for Bryan, saying how nice he was and how they hang out with him on Friday nights. Everything we've heard from everybody is kind of the same type of experience that they've had.
Yeah. No, you're right. That's true. Sasha says, my brother died by suicide. I was the last to see and talk to him and found him. I was investigated. Scariest thing ever and maddening. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sorry for your loss. Our condolences. And I can't imagine having to go through the loss of somebody and then also being accused for their loss. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
You had mentioned earlier circumstantial evidence. I'll share a quick story. So one of my mom's best friends when I was very little was murdered by a law enforcement officer. And there was a conflict there because of a girl that they were both dating at one time. And this law enforcement officer actually pulled him over. And, this was right after he had gotten off of work. He was getting onto the freeway and he was pulled over, and his coworkers had driven past and saw this happening, right? And saw this officer pulling him to the side of the road, and then nobody ever saw him again. And they never did discover his body or any real physical evidence. But what they did have is, some things that they'd found that was circumstantial evidence. And it was actually one of the very first cases in San Diego County, I think, or even just ever, where they convicted somebody of murder without having a body, to prove it. But there was enough circumstantial evidence there that, to your point, when you talk about reasonable doubt, there was no way to deny that he had done this. I mean, they had things like, he had stolen a police car in order to commit the crime, and then I think there was some rope found and some different things, but I agree with you on that. So just kind of sharing a story, kind of like Sasha did there. You don't necessarily have to have every piece of evidence has to be directly connecting. The circumstantial evidence can definitely prove somebody's guilt, depending on what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. John Doe comes back saying there's no proof that BK's car was at the crime scene. If you go back and watch that Linda Lane footage, there's a spot where Bryan Kohberger sits there for a minute, right? And then he backs up, and then he turns the wheel while he's stationary. Mm-hmm. Do you know what happens when you turn the wheel while you're stationary? You leave compounds of your tire on the ground. And we all saw a lot of video and pictures of the police going out there and taking samples of different tire marks. Now, do we know that they knew which one it was? Probably not. they probably didn't know at that time. But how soon do you think they had that Linda Lane footage? Probably within a week or so. And, you have a video of this white Elantra. You can tell that where it's approximately located, in front of 507, apartment 507 Queen Road. You can see those things. So you can go back and look at, all right, did we pick up tire tread or tire compound from any of those spots that are out there? And sure enough, there it is. And you can corroborate the spot that there's a tire tread with the spot on the Linda Lane footage. Then you can say that white vehicle that was driving around, if you can get that tire and put it back to it, then you can prove that was his vehicle. Now, remember, his vehicle was from Pennsylvania, right? So I wonder, when it comes to like tires and things like this, and this is what forensic guys will do, is they'll determine, where that rubber compound was made at, right? And there's only so much of the compound that you're going to get the same, right? So you might have a few tires that go through, right, that have the same rubber, right? Because it's all being manufactured in the same place. And then after a little bit, there's more different types of rubber that are manufacturing or creating the tire. Well, anyways, if he's from Pennsylvania and they can prove that he came from a certain type of tire and a certain series of tires that were shipped out to the East Coast during a specific time, I mean, that's more information that shows that it was this guy. And if you can prove that tire mark is the tire that he had, and they got him, dude. And do you think that right now the prosecution would be arguing that? I mean, the defense would be arguing that right now? No, because that would not make their client look good.
No, this timing for them, with that. You remember there's that description in the PCA as well, where it talks about him suddenly stopping, almost like he's going to park and then turn around. I think that location would have been of interest to them as well, because they have video footage of the car being right in that spot. Mm-hmm. So they're going to focus in on that spot. And we've seen pictures of in front of the King Road house, that morning of the murders, where there's those kind of like skid marks that turn. Have you seen that one? So though it could be his car, right? He could have been coming down that hill and did kind of a moment, where you're about to turn, but you go a little too far, and then there could be some tread marks there. I don't know if those skid marks are going to be his car. Now, if those matched, that would be telling, but they do know some spots to look for tread marks.
Yeah, they do. They got some video, and so that's going to prove his car. If they're able to prove that the tire marks came from Bryan Kohberger's car, and that's added on top of everything that's there, I mean, how much does he really need to come forward and tell you guys, I killed those 4 people, for you guys some of these folks to believe that he'd do this?
And do you think there's probably more clear footage out there as well? It may be not right there on King Road, but in the surrounding areas, wouldn't you think that there's better quality footage?
I would say that they probably have some, but here's the thing. Like, I honestly, truly ain't biased. Like, for instance, I can tell you that if they thought it was a 2013-11 Elantra up until the point that they found out who Bryan Kohberger was, that tells me they didn't have great footage. Mm-hmm. Because if they did, they would have been able to determine that it was 2015. So we found out later that they don't have footage from cameras, from the street cams. So those are the cams that you would have probably suspect to have the technology to see the license plate or minor details. Mm-hmm. They don't have those. So that tells me that they probably all they have is like ring cam footage. And, when you have ring cam, where's that camera usually located? In front of the house. And where's that usually pointed at? Towards the street. And usually cars aren't facing towards houses when they're driving by. They're facing, the way they're driving. So you're going to get a profile of the vehicle at best. So it's going to be hard to get, things from what they have. But I mean, if there's anything on that car that's unique, a bump or a dent or any of those things, it'd be good to know.
if you look in the body cam footage when he was pulled over in October, you can, if you look at the top part above the window, there's a wear spot on the paint. Take a look at that when you get a minute. But I don't, and that's kind of at one point I was thinking, you know, what is the quality of the footage? Because in the PCA they mentioned the initial thought was a 2011, 2013, and then I think the PCA goes on to say that they were then given footage from WSU. And that is my understanding of when it changed the year, is because I think that additional footage that they got may have been better quality or of a different angle. And that helped that FBI analyst kind of focus in, you know, a little bit more, or change that it could be within this window. And I don't even, you know, that gets brought up a lot, you know, why did it change? I don't think that really matters. The bottom, whether it's a 2010 to a 2020 Whitey Elantra, it's still a Whitey Elantra that's Bryan's. And again, it's with every other piece of evidence on top of that. If that was all they had, then yeah, that might come into question. But this is just one piece of the whole story against Bryan. So even if they had the years off, I don't think that's necessarily makes that evidence invalid.
No, it doesn't. You know, you'd have to get an expert to say that vehicle is not a 2013. Now, obviously, and again, this is another example of me not being biased. I tell you guys the truth. I'm straightforward with you guys. The only thing that some people can't, you know, figure out is that there's just so much against Bryan Kohberger that I'd be lying to myself and to y'all if I said that there was some sort of conspiracy. But with the license plate or the pictures there, they didn't, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that they didn't know who Bryan Kohberger was until December 19th, December 20th. And at that point, they probably saw the fact that they had a White Elantra that was driving by or whatever, and they didn't have the vehicle down. They didn't know. All they had was Moscow. Remember, he took a long ass drive back to elude the investigation. So that way, when they looked at the cameras going into Pullman, he wasn't driving in, you know, at 4:30 or 4:48.
That time window that they would expect.
Exactly. It already surpassed. So when they figured out that it was Bryan Kohberger, they probably then went back to the Pullman cameras and continued to watch those cameras for a longer extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, you see him. Well, and also earlier too, before and after. And you can see that he's driving around, then he leaves, and then he comes back. And I think that those cameras were probably the more better ones that kind of gave him the idea that it could have been a 2014 to 2016. Now, what saves the ass of the prosecution on this is that Detective Payne said that the FBI profiler, or the vehicle profiler, whatever you want to call it, analyzer, he had said that they were looking for a type of vehicle, a vehicle that would be similar to a 2011 to 2013 Elantra, not necessarily the exact vehicle. And what saves their ass is that they didn't know who Bryan Kohberger was until December 20th, and they didn't know that it was a possibility of a 2015 Elantra until then. And yet, when Pullman police and WSU police were given the description of the vehicle and what to go look for, they targeted a 2015 Elantra, and they had his vehicle logged in and documented as a vehicle that they looked for, which corroborates what Detective Payne was saying as far as that they were looking for a type of vehicle. Because if they were looking specifically for a 2011 to 2013 Elantra, that vehicle would not have been found on November 29th and entered into some sort of database as a vehicle that have been located. That saves the ass of the prosecution. If they didn't do that, not necessarily saying that it matters, but you know, the defense would have more weight, you know, to stand on or whatever, as far as them saying that they focused in on him and they didn't know who he was until they got the DNA or whatever the case they're trying to argue. But it's going to save their ass, man. And good for them, dude, because at the end of the day, like, you're right, does it freaking matter what they thought week one of the investigation? Shoot, the second day when the mayor came out, said that this was a crime of passion, you know, he didn't say that just because he thought of it that morning. Somebody told him that. And what did you know on the second day? We had one victim stabbed more than the others, which was Kaylee. She was the one that had a recent breakup with her boyfriend. She's the one that's leaving. She was also the one that was that night with Jack at the corner club, and he lives down the street. So everything at that point is pointing towards him. As evidence comes in, police and law enforcement and anybody doing an investigation has the right to follow that evidence. And if it leads you one way, that's where you need to do that. And this is another great example of the police following the evidence and taking it where it leads you. What a police officer is supposed to do is, if you have an idea of who the person is, you follow it. Now, you follow the evidence, and if it leads you away, then it leads you away. And if it led him away from Jack to Core, then, what difference? He's not from the area. He's from Coeur d'Alene. He's not from Moscow. If they had anything that led them away from Bryan Kohberger, don't you think they would have done the same thing too?
Yeah, they want to catch the right guy.
Exactly.
It's kind of like the whole innocence argument. What is it? Is it a conspiracy? Is it corruption? Or is it incompetence? Which one is it?
I mean, I don't know.
You can't explain any of them. They don't make sense.
To me, this story is clear as day, man. And I don't understand some of these connections. I heard somebody say that they don't believe in coincidences, and that because the Idaho home belonged to an investment company, and somewhere along that line of this investment company, somebody lives in Colorado somewhere. And Eugene, Oregon, Hyundai Elantra comes back to a separate person in a different part of the state of Colorado. And yet that's too big of a coincidence that the Elantra comes from one person in Colorado in one city, and that the house is owned by somebody else in a different city in Colorado by a different name. And that's too big of a coincidence. Yet the fact that Bryan Kohberger was out and about the night that the murders occurred with his phone off, his vehicle seen outside, a description of somebody that matches his, it's corroborated with his DNA inside of the house. And you have like his phone off during the time. And I mean, it's just
an eyewitness.
Much. Yeah. And then you have after the fact, right? You have everything that they found afterwards. We find out he's been driving by there a few times, 12 times apparently over the last couple of weeks. We find out that he purchased the Dickies clothes. I think it was Monday before the murders. Well, I mean, come on. And they're missing now. So it wasn't like something that he had purchased a long time ago.
Right.
And he lost it in the move or something.
Yeah. Where is it? Yeah. Dark clothing. Where is it? Right. Do you think the shoe prints are going to fit his shoe size? Maybe. Or do you think he would have thrown on different size?
He could have. I think it's more important the type of shoe that we're seeing. It's a Vans footprint.
Right.
Vans is very common, especially with college age students.
Yep.
So that's probably to throw some people off. If he's trying to throw them up, I would suspect that he wear a different size shoes, maybe one bigger. It'd be easier to take off. But I mean, if he went with like a 12, I'm sure he could fit in the 12. I mean, if you're a 13, I'm about 12 and a half. I can fit in a 13. I can fit in a 12 in some shoes. And, I can go into like, I put my foot into an 11 and a half once, and it was really tight. But it worked. You know what I mean? I could physically capably walk for 20 minutes in that shoe. I mean, it wouldn't have prevented me that. Now with Vans, they have slip-on shoes, which is interesting because that's very quick to take off.
Exactly.
And put on.
Yep.
So, those things I think are what are important. It just kind of goes to the extent of the detail that somebody went in planning this murder.
Yeah. And like the Dickies receipt, if there was a receipt, for example, of a pair of shoes and it matched, that would be one thing. But then if you look at the tread pattern, if it was a recent purchase, that tread pattern would be unworn, right? So it's possible they could even find connections that way. There's a lot that they can gain from that type of evidence. Even blood spatter, latent footprints. It can really offer a lot of insight into other things. If they had a recent purchase of a pair of shoes, and that tread pattern is new, like on the shoes, it's not worn. It's just another thing that adds to it.
Yeah.
Birthing hips.
Iona Pear says birthing hips still can't get over that one. So again, this is going to be a few examples of how I am not biased. Birthing hips comes from a movie, Dark Shadows, with Johnny Depp, came out in 2012. And his whole thing is people that have birthing hips. And it's funny. I'm not going to lie. So when this came out, I was like, yeah, that's not what that is. Even when the blood that was on his pillowcase, you know, when that came out, I was like, yeah, that's probably not the victims. And the reason being is, if this guy was soaked in blood to the point where he laid down, one, what does that say? It says he didn't shower, he didn't change, he didn't do, or at least didn't change. There would probably be other evidence of other blood, not just on the pillow, like on the mattress, maybe perhaps on the doorknob coming in, on the floor, walking to that area, maybe wherever he took his clothes off. I mean, there would have been a ton of evidence. The matter of the fact is, he came from Pennsylvania, which is, he came from the Pocono area, which is a lot of trees. You can expect a lot of humidity in that area. It's a wet cold in that area. You go to Idaho, you don't have that, and it's dry. And what happens to somebody who is accustomed to humid or moist weather, and then they go in somewhere where it's dry and cold? They get nosebleeds. So those type of things that have popped out that I have said, no, that's not it. That's not it. That's not what's it. And that should show you I'm really truly not biased. I mean, those things I would love. I wouldn't love. I would.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think it's the victim's blood, you know, on the mattress. You know, I don't see him, you know, weeks after the crime leaving that there. He would have cleaned up and been careful, right, in that process. The hair is intriguing to me. The potential animal hair that they found under the mat, the mouse pad. Because I could see something like that being overlooked, possibly being on, you know, picking up a hair from the house on his clothes that could have fallen off. But I also feel like he would have removed his clothing before going into his house. So it's hard to say, but I am intrigued by that hair. I'm kind of in that buddy camp. I think that whole buddy situation is very unusual, and I'm just really curious about the potential animal hair that they found.
Where was it at? Was it in the vent?
It was under the mouse pad.
Under the mouse?
Under his mouse pad, yeah. It's in the warrant findings from I never saw that apartment. Yeah, it's on one of my videos. I'll send it to you though as well.
All right. So if it's under his mouse pad, if it's under the mouse pad, that's been since he's lived there. That's not something from previous, right?
That's the kind of place you could overlook something, you know. It's just unusual. But because you know how when they searched his apartment, there was only about 12 items that they listed that they took. It was about 12 different hairs, one being a potential animal hair. And then they later on released the document as far as what the presumptive testing found in the apartment, right, which showed that it was a couple of the samples did test positive for blood, which we agree it's most likely his blood. But it described that animal hair was found underneath the mouse pad.
Interesting, man. I mean, that definitely means that animal hair was placed there since Bryan Kohberger had moved.
Yeah, and he doesn't own anything.
Kat says, I do not know, but a month after the killings, there was a group of men went into the home. No one knows why. They collected stuff and just left. Got me thinking, why? This is another example, like where I mentioned that if people see something and they don't understand, or it's not told to them, they assume it's mysterious or something else. So would you consider Moscow rural their true crime?
Moscow
A rural area?
Yeah, I would say it's a rural.
All right. It's rural, it's mountain-ish, some places.
Yeah.
Would you assume like investigators would wear a suit or uniform? Well, what do you think happened? Do you think detectives wear plain clothes, or do you think they wear uniform?
Oh, well, detectives coming in later on, I think, would be in a suit. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So where I'm from, and it's different, it's far away from that area, but where I'm from, there's the police department, and then you have the county. Mm-hmm. I can tell you for a fact the county handles a more rural area. Part of their clothing that they wear is cowboy boots, cowboy pants, and a cowboy hat. Mm-hmm. It's a rural area. And their detectives wear something similar. However, there's no uniform involved. And so I wouldn't be surprised if those guys were detectives from the Idaho State police or maybe even Moscow detectives or FBI detectives from the area. People that are in the area will dress like other people from the area. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you're
and
not
I
going to
wonder
see
too-
somebody in shorts out there in the winter.
Yeah, because I mean, this is the first I have heard of a group of men going. Now, I do know of a documented situation
Cowboys.
where Ann Taylor went with her team to the apartment, and they actually had Bryan had signed a paper that let them go back to his apartment to recover the keys on the top of the TV in his apartment in order to give, I guess it was for the university. And so they did revisit the apartment, and that was the Idaho State Police also were in attendance when that happened. So they went there and met Ann Taylor and her defense team. They went into the apartment and gathered some of Bryan's belongings, including a key off the keychain. And then the officer actually notes that they took a box of items out of Bryan's apartment that she did not know what they were. It was an unknown items in a box that they removed. They also removed from Bryan's apartment after the fact a receipt that they discovered. I think it was in a medicine cabinet. And so I was talking in another video of mine about some of the evidence in his apartment. And, it does mention the receipts that they took, right, regarding the purchase of the clothing. And that would match up. Yep, that would match up with what they're looking for. And now here we're hearing about another receipt that was in the apartment that Ann Taylor went in and recovered. So the fact that they didn't take that receipt tells me it's not relevant to what they were looking for. However, the other ones they did take, there's something there, right? It adds validity to those Dickies receipts that you mentioned, and potentially that Walmart receipt as well. That I think there was 2 receipts, one, right? Marshalls. There were 2 Marshalls receipts. So why would they take those receipts and leave this other receipt behind? But anyway, Ann Taylor's team did go back into that apartment and remove items. And I wonder if maybe that's what's being discussed.
Maybe. I mean, what was it? OJ's lawyer, Kardashian, supposedly allegedly took the bag of clothes that OJ was wearing and a Louis Vuitton bag out of the house. I mean, lawyers have been known to do some crazy stuff. Heather Fitzgerald says, I have a video of Xana where the year prior and those skid marks, 2,000,000% already there. People can add skid marks over time. And there's clear evidence of where the vehicle's turning. Now, I'm not sure if Xana was over there in front of apartment 507 Queen Road or even in the Queen Road intersection. However, just because there were some skid marks prior doesn't mean that there wasn't any added. And the good thing about what we know about that night is there's video footage of the vehicle when it was doing its maneuvers and where it was when it was doing its maneuvers and when it was doing its turns, which would be a good indication of which one of those skid marks belonged to that vehicle. So, I mean, there's more to it. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not just as, oh, you know what? We have a lot of skid marks here. They were here. Some of them were here before. We got to throw them all out. That's not how it works. Plus, if there are some skid marks there and you're like, well, which ones were they? And you happen to find Bryan Kohberger's skid marks there. Well, that it wasn't the ones that were left a year ago because he wasn't there a year ago. Know what I mean? There's ways to pinpoint it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard.
And there may be evidence that they find it doesn't fit. I mean, that's part of the investigation. It's possible. It's just one piece, though.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's another, like, I don't mean to be mean or anything, but another indication of if I don't see it, it's not true, and that's far from the truth of things. We may have seen them taking videos and pictures of certain skid marks that were on the road that may have been there before, but that may not be the only skid marks that they worked on. Mm-hmm. Remember, not everybody that speaks Spanish is a Border Patrol agent. We have to remember that logic, and it's a cognitive, question, and you have to go based on that. Like, and it's more than just that term, but it's like, hey, everybody that's in the Border Patrol speaks Spanish, but not everybody that speaks Spanish is a Border Patrol agent.
Yeah.
And so, was there skid marks before? Yeah. Does that mean that there hasn't been any new ones? And can they determine the age of those skid marks? 100%. Mm-hmm. Especially if they just collected it. They collected it the day after the murders or the day of the discovery of the video.
Yeah, I think we're going to be surprised at some of the things that they do have when the trial comes around. Hopefully, if we do get to that point ever. But did you see? I wanted to ask you. Did you happen to see Bill Thompson's reaction when Bryan Kohberger was walking into the courtroom in yesterday's hearing?
I didn't, man. I listened to it because I was at work.
It's interesting to me, right? Because he probably has more insight than anybody into the evidence in this case, and he knows, I think, more aside from Bryan. He might be the person who knows the most about what happened in that house, and the way he kind of looks over when Bryan's walking. Bryan's off camera, and then he how he kind of sits with his hand over his head, but he kind of looks at Bryan and then just immediately puts his hand over his head. And in my opinion, the body language, it was just kind of like he's disgusted with him, because he has seen the evidence. He knows.
That's true. Tanya brings up an interesting comment. She says, when he was arrested, he didn't say WTF. He didn't say, what? Why are you arresting me? He said, anyone else arrested?
Yeah, I think
it's interesting.
He did say that, as we heard that early on. And what I really think is he was concerned about his dad. I think his dad knows more. Right.
I understand that. But why would he be concerned of his dad if he's truly innocent and he didn't do anything? Why would he be concerned about anybody else?
Yeah. But I think he knew he was getting arrested. And I think he was wondering, was his dad also arrested for, I really think when his dad went out there, Bryan was in the process of moving, and kind of to your point, I think they knew things and sensed things. And I just think it's very peculiar that when they were pulled over in Indiana, their stories were aligned. His dad, how many times have you been driving? I don't know if you've been pulled over, Daniel, but quite a bit. Usually the driver is the person who the officer is having that direct conversation with, right? This. But Bryan's dad it kind of inserts himself in there in between, and it kind of jumps into that conversation almost as if he's protecting Bryan. And their story is perfect. They're both talking about Bryan, not just on one traffic stop, but on the second traffic stop. They bring up the same conversation as if it's almost rehearsed. And I think that they were both nervous, and I think that they were this is my opinion. I think Bryan's dad knew or knows a lot more. And it makes me wonder if Bryan was concerned that his father may have been arrested for something. Well, even something as minor as helping being with him when Bryan was disposing of evidence or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe.
Why else?
I also thought that because of his father, but if you're assuming that they're arresting your father for, bringing you across the country and things of that nature, and then you're probably also making an assumption or pretty much saying that you committed this crime, because why else would they arrest him? Mm-hmm. It's like I would not be asking, did you arrest somebody else? I would be asking, why are you arresting me?
Good point.
What evidence do you have? I understand why he's asking about his father, but that's almost like an unconscious admittance that he committed something wrong, or he did something wrong, and his father went with him away from there, and then he's concerned that he's going to get arrested.
Yeah, almost like he's conceded that he's caught, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He asked that follow-up question.
Alicia brings up a comment, says the Karen Reed case is a conspiracy. This case is not a conspiracy. What do you think about the Karen Reed case?
I followed it a little bit. I don't know if like I said, my time, right, is so invested in this case. I'm trying to get into more. I've been following more of the Delphi case a little bit, but I've heard that there, I don't know if it's a conspiracy. It's, I don't know if I can talk enough on it, but it takes a lot, I think, to prove a conspiracy.
I do too. However, and this is another case where people say that I'm biased, that because I'm ex-law enforcement, that I only side with the police. I don't only side with the police. In fact, if you look at my history, I think I've sided with the police once in one of the cases that I've covered, and that's the Bryan Kohberger case. You just, people just get butthurt because that's the one, you know what I'm saying? But in the Karen Reed case, I'm not sure about, man. Honestly, I would have thought, going through the trial and stuff, I'm a betting man and I had to put a bet on it, I'd say that she hit him, right? But not on purpose. I think it was more of an accident type of thing. Maybe she knew, maybe she was unaware, completely kind of, maybe in denial that it actually happened, something to that effect. I don't think they've proven beyond reasonable doubt that she committed murder. I do think that there are some not suspicious. I think that this Proctor guy, he shouldn't be a cop no more. That guy's a piece of crap, and he shouldn't be a cop.
Yeah, I think that's you were kind of pointing out too, just like in this case. So with a conspiracy versus maybe, I think a lot of times when there's errors that are made by law enforcement or investigators, we jump to conspiracy or corruption, and I think often it's training, and I think a lot of the time there's good intentions behind things, but you have lack of training, and then you have people who just aren't qualified to be in a position, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that because a conspiracy and corruption takes multiple people, right? Multiple people working together in order to make something happen, where you can have somebody who's a horrible investigator or a police officer who's corrupt themselves, who does things wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean, a systemic, process is happening there. So like with Karen Reed, there could be an officer who did things wrong or is horrible at their job, but I think that's different, right, than corruption and conspiracy. From what I've heard, she, there's evidence as far as like the broken tail light and things, right, on the vehicle from when she would have hit him.
Maybe. I mean, there's been some conspiracy there that there's video that shows that it's there intact after supposedly she would have hit him. Mm-hmm. And that the Proctor, I think it was, had access to the vehicle for over an hour than when he claimed. And there's a suspicion there that he dropped some things. Now, here's the other thing. This was in like, they were Boston officers, but this was like a Canton, Massachusetts investigation, right? Mm-hmm. Did you know that and I'm investigating this, and this is going to be my next one, guys. So y'all make sure you like and subscribe. And again, I'm not just biased towards law enforcement, but that police department, Canton or whatever they're called, Canton, I'm not sure. There's been some interesting things going on. So there was a suicide by a 21-year-old who was pregnant a few years back, and a very well-known and respected pathologist has come in and did an autopsy or whatnot, and he has ruled it from a suicide to a homicide. And there's some suspicion that 3 of those police officers may have been involved in grooming this person. Now, when there's a suicide by hanging, there is several tales that you'll be able to see when it comes to the manner of them dying. One is like certain things breaking, the trachea being a certain way, but also the position of the noose. If it's in one position that most people would assume is where the noose would be at when somebody hangs themselves, is a clear indication. And I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want anybody to screw anybody else over, but there's a specific way that the noose will align itself when somebody hangs themselves in a suicide. And there are certain injuries that occur during that moment. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, like, this was a strangulation more so, and the pathologist believes that was what it was, and that they try to cover it up by putting her in a noose. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying that any of these officers were involved in that. I'm not saying that, her suicide was in fact a murder. I haven't seen any of those things, but this is something that I'm working on for the next case, to look into those officers. I, for one, am not, pro any officer.
Right.
Like, I am more skeptical, and I think I'm harder on police officers and law enforcement agencies because I understand and know what should be done and how it should be done. And with these guys in this department here, if any of this is true, and even if it comes to the Karen Reed stuff, I'm going to put this as out there as loud as I possibly can, because it don't matter whether you're a cop, freaking doctor, a clergyman. If you're doing something wrong and you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, you deserve to have that put out there.
Yeah. And
Know
you
what I
can
mean?
see how it can just grow. Where I think there was a case, I can't remember the city that it was in, but there were multiple officers who kind of beat up that guy, and it was almost like they were a gang, you know, just like kind of the 4 or 5 of them, and they were all convicted. So similar, you can have, because with law enforcement officers, they're a very close, tight-knit group, and so you can see how these kind of cliques could form within a department, and then watching each other's backs, and maybe somebody makes a mistake and then others get kind of pulled into it.
I can only speak in the departments that I've worked in. I was never part of the clique. I never trusted cops.
Yeah,
I've seen it. I didn't trust cops. And the reason being is I saw more cops screw each other over to try to make themselves something better, like a better position, than anything I'd ever seen in my life. I've seen more cops screw each other's wives and all these other things than I've seen anything else. So, I'm not this pro cop guy that's like, oh man, no matter what they do, I'm back into blue. That's not me. Okay.
No, there's a lot of training and mistakes that are made.
Right. And when it comes to wrongdoings, I follow the evidence. I look at the evidence, and the evidence points in this direction, it points in that direction. If the evidence in Bryan Kohberger's case pointed to police corruption, just like I'm pulling this out for this Canton police department, doing the same for Moscow. I don't know them. I never worked for that department. I've never even been in Idaho. So why do I care if this department is corrupt? In fact, I want to bring that up. The fact that I haven't seen any of that, it should be an indication. If you look at my track record of me being very critical of the Delphi law enforcement, the law enforcement in the Karen Reed case, the law enforcement in this past case, Kaylana Turner case, shoot, right there, I'm only 20% on the side of police. The other 4 out of 5, I don't like what's going on.
Yeah, well, and your point is, following the evidence, right? If something is leading you toward corruption or something, then that makes sense, right? To investigate it and look at, but you can't just make things up out of the blue and say it's valid. And I think a lot of that happens in the Coburger case. When we talk about evidence and things that are just kind of like the drug dealing theory, right? There hasn't been any evidence really that has led us there. I'm open to somebody bringing that up and following it if it makes sense. I just haven't found that. And then you jump to the Emma Bailey conspiracy, right? And there's that whole thing going on that people have brought up. There's nothing connecting those things. And so when you talk about, following the evidence, it applies to police officers as well, right? It's the same thing. If there's something there that shows you that there's incompetence or corruption, then you have to investigate that. And because it does happen, it does happen. And it happens for different reasons. It happens because I mentioned lack of training. I think that's a big part of our issue with, a lot of the situations that officers find themselves in, but there's also morals and integrity, right, that come into play with people. They're humans. And we've also talked about law enforcement officers also having a lot of demons per se, right? When you talk about, they typically, they are, connected to domestic violence and there's, law enforcement officers who will even commit murders. Right. And so
Bryan Kohberger was trying to be a law enforcement officer.
Exactly. And so you have to investigate those things. You have to look at those things if there's evidence there leading you to it.
Right. And I'm not saying every cop is bad. Majority of cops are great. I'm saying that there is probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 15, I don't know, maybe 10% is a little high, maybe 5% of the entire, police officers that are bad. And usually, I'll be honest, a lot of them are the old time guys, the good old boys that got away with everything. And so, they are the ones that who and whatever and stuff like that. But yeah, man, there's some great cops, and I'm not trying to bury anybody either. I worked with some great ones, and I worked with some that weren't so great. And I've heard of some amazing officers, and I've heard of some that aren't so great either.
Yeah.
And
I have a quick example. Somebody I grew up with, a friend of mine, became a police officer, and he found himself in a situation. He was actually working. I think he was patrolling like colleges or something. And, there's those auditors who will go around with a camera, right? And they'll film police officers. So he was doing something like a ticket. And this was years ago when this was kind of first starting. And the auditor kind of had the camera on him, and he made a really bad decision, and he drew his firearm, right, in this kind of confrontation with this cameraman. He didn't point it at him, but he did draw his firearm, and he was disciplined for that afterward, right, because the situation escalated, and he made a poor decision. And I've known this person my whole life, and he's a good person. He has good morals. He comes from a family, background in law enforcement and fire department and things like that. And he wasn't, a bad officer, but he made a bad choice in the moment, right? He made a mistake. And then afterward, in hindsight, he kind of looked back and realized what he had done. And so it's just an example of, what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it's a quick decision. Sometimes it's a situation that they weren't properly prepared for or trained for. And then, there's different levels of how these things happen, and, different scenarios that cause them to unfold. And you just have to kind of look at each one individually. And then there are those extreme cases where you have complete departments that are struggling with integrity and things like that. And I think it can snowball when you have a bad culture that can fester, right, and spread.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely will. And like I said, when I was an officer, I saw a lot of cops screw each other over trying to get higher positions. I've heard about that in several departments. I just did my job, and then when I had an opportunity to make a better living for myself, I took it, man. A lot of injuries, dude, and you don't get paid enough to deal with it. Thank you, Robert P, for your $5 super sticker. We have Steelers fan coming in with being a member for 14 months. I can say that. Nice. Most of those 14 months weren't paid, but thank you so much, Steelers fan. She says, "What's up?" And I can throw her on blast because that's my wife. Aquarian One becomes a YouTube member. Thank you so much. Yeah, Canton. Sorry about that. I was kind of like, I was doubting myself because I was thinking of Canton, Ohio, where the Hall of Fame is at for the NFL. And so I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Yeah, Heather. That's sorry for your loss, Heather. Our condolences. Yeah, if you have a question about Karen Reed, just ask. It's live. I mean, it's not something we're talking about. I really don't know too much about it. I've been watching it a little bit. I think that I don't think they proved that she committed murder. I don't think that they proved that he ever went in the house either. John O'Keefe. Like I said, if I was a betting man, I'd say that she probably hit him. Not knowingly, or maybe halfway knowingly, like maybe said, did I really do that? Maybe it was in denial. I don't think it was on purpose.
You don't think it could have been a domestic thing and she was angry and backed into him? That's what I've heard. I've heard that they were fighting and there were some issues, and then she dropped him off. And I just wonder if in the moment, right, she may have been mad, and people do things in the heat of the moment and backed into him, maybe not intending to kill him, maybe just kind of wanting to injure him, and it ended up being worse.
Yeah. I mean, he was out in the cold for an extreme long time, an extreme cold. Yeah. The odds were stacked up against him in that situation. Thank you guys. I appreciate everything that's coming through. Just like I said, in that case, you can clearly see something's up. Mm-hmm. In the Delphi case, what I don't like about the Delphi case is the interviews from Brad Holder and that other guy have suddenly mysteriously disappeared. I don't like that.
Yeah,
I don't like that one bit, sure. Dude.
Yeah,
I don't like the fact that Elvis Field said some interesting things, and I've seen the scene. And what he says maybe doesn't describe it completely, but it's too damn close to be comfortable with.
Do you think the confession is legit on the phone? Apparently, Richard Allen was talking to his wife.
I do think Richard Allen was involved. I question if he was the only person. The reason why I believe he was involved is the fact that he arrived there, according to himself, I think it was like at 1:30-ish or right before the girls did. And he describes the scenario when he walked into the park there, that there were 3 juveniles walking out, or 4 juveniles walking out. And he described one being taller, and those juveniles had been identified, and they spoke, and they described the same scenario, and they have a picture that they took prior to them exiting the park or the trail on a bench there, and it was time-stamped at 1:26. So we know that it was past 1:26 when they crossed paths. Now, I've gone back and I've measured it out. I've done some math, and I've also watched people that walk. Got an average of about somewhere between, I think I said somewhere around 13 minutes is probably how long it takes somebody from one end to the other. And when that ends up happening, and he got there at 1:30, that's 1:43 when he's back over there. At 1:46 or 45, I think that's when the one female that sees somebody standing on the bridge comes in and is walking in that direction. Then when she turns around, she passes by who she thinks is Libby and Abby. And what old boy said was that he went out there and he looked at the fish, and then he went back and sat on a bench, but nobody saw anybody matching his description sitting on a bench. And the person that arrived there at 1:45, she walked the trail back and forth and went back. Had he sat on the bench, even if he had left after her, when she came back, she would have seen him, because he said he was there till 3 and she wasn't.
Yeah.
So I find it very difficult for him not to be the guy on the bridge. Also, if you look at the bridge, the camera, check it out, man. The guy that's walking on that bridge, if you look at the distance, or not the distance, but if you look at the arm sleeve of the person that is walking with his hand in his pocket, that arm sleeve between the elbow and the wrist is really scrunched up. That's usually an indication of somebody who's shorter. You also see a brown shirt that is extremely long coming out of underneath his jacket. I know some people thought it was some kind of fanny pack, but it's not. It goes all the way around. And that's also another indication of somebody who is shorter. And if you look at the pants, they're scrunched up at the bottom, and you can even see a fold in the pants. Now, if you had somebody who was 6 foot or 6'2", like Ron Logan, he would have other problems. His instead of the arm sleeves on a Carhartt sweater, jacket, whatever, which is not, obviously it's not tailor-made to his size or to Richard Allen's, you'd probably see a difference. You'd see where his arm would be a little bit longer. Instead of the pants having to be folded up, you might see a high water effect. You're not seeing those things. So whoever it is on that bridge is somebody who is shorter. I'm not going to say how short, but he's not of average height.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you think the bullet ended up between the bodies?
I would say that he probably tried to control them by cocking back the gun.
Yeah.
And it ejected, and then during the commotion, somebody stepped on it or whatever the case may have been, and it got dug into the ground.
Yeah, I think he, because he a theory I had on that was he bought the gun in, I think, 2001, so he's owned it for quite a while, and I think he's probably been storing it. And I kind of wonder if he had that gun stored with around people. Some people aren't, I'm not gonna say not smart, but some people will store their firearms loaded, right? Some people will store them loaded with a round in the chamber. Some people will store the ammunition completely separate. And I kind of imagine if he had been storing that weapon for a period of time with a round in the chamber, maybe he was using it as a home defense weapon, and he had a lapse of memory that there was a round in the chamber. And then, to your point, was using that gun to control them and went to rack around, not realizing there was a round already in the chamber, and it would have ejected out. Right. And then maybe he lost track of it, or maybe he didn't even notice, depending on where he was looking. But I think I agree with you. I think it was a situation of control, and he kind of similar to the knife sheath being a mistake. That could have been a mistake.
Right. Yeah. And Greg says To me, it's way more obvious that the Idaho 4 case is more corrupt than the state PD here in Massachusetts. He goes on to say, it's so obvious. I've never seen a gag order like this. I've seen several gag orders like that. In fact, this is to protect Bryan Kohberger's rights. And I have never, ever seen a crime scene demolished and buried 6 foot deep. I didn't see the police department or the police department or the prosecution actually doing that. I think that it was a request from the University of Idaho. And I think that Bill Thompson is very comfortable with the amount of evidence that they have against Bryan Kohberger, that they don't need the place. And Ann Taylor wasn't arguing about not throwing it down either. Right. Yeah. So again, I didn't see Chief Fry out there with, in the back of the damn, tractor trying to knock down the house. Right. So I don't understand where you correlate a house being knocked down and law enforcement being corrupt in that situation.
Yeah. And don't you think that the defense team for Bryan would be fighting to protect any evidence in there that would be favorable to Bryan? I again, to your point, there was no objection to the home being demolished. If there were, then I think they would have heard out the defense's argument, right? If the defense team had been really pushing against the the destroying of the house because there was some sort of evidence there that we're going to prove Bryan's innocence, they would have done that, but there isn't.
Yeah, no, there ain't. Greg continues to say that Moscow PD literally has a known history of authorizing falsifiable affidavits, like on record. Right, but does Detective Payne do? Like right now we're talking about Proctor, right? So if Proctor gets fired and they hire a new guy who is this straight A, cadet out of the academy, clean record, what people think Bryan Kohberger should have been, right? This guy, PhD student, should he be classified as the same thing as Proctor without ever even stepping foot into the city or barely becoming a police officer or an investigator? Probably not, right? I don't think you can look at what somebody did in the past that has nothing to do with this case and say, oh, they're reflected of each other. If that was the case, then let's just do away with law enforcement, because I think at every department they've had an issue with a bad cop at one point. So, hey, this guy, they had a bad cop 25 years ago. Let's knock it all down. There's no law enforcement. My man, your reasoning is just not there.
Well, and let's just concede. Okay, let's just say, okay, they're corrupt and they falsified some of the PCA. Does that still? How does that prove Bryan's innocence? That's telling me that okay, they falsified something, but that's still not necessarily explaining away the knife sheath. Are you saying that they planted the knife? You have to expand on that, right? You have to go a little bit further. Right. You can't just say, oh, they're all corrupt. Well, explain how this played out. Explain the steps that they took and all of these people that are involved. It can't just be Brett Payne. It's got to be multiple agencies that are involved in this case, right? Brett Payne isn't processing every piece of evidence in the case. So by pointing to one person or even one department in this case doesn't necessarily prove corruption. You have multiple agencies that are involved.
Yeah, I don't think there's any corruption in this case, like whatsoever. There's no need. And again, like I think some of the explanations for some stuff was like, oh, they targeted Bryan because he's an outsider. Well, so was the detective that went after him. He wasn't from Moscow. So
why wouldn't they have targeted Jack? Wouldn't that be easier? The closest person to the victims.
I mean, well, not even that.
I'm just saying, if you're going to set somebody up, why choose Bryan? Yeah.
Why not use Brent Kopacka?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
if you're going to set somebody up, you're going to set someone up. He can't argue back. He has apparently threatened to kill roommates, right? They killed him under, some people think it's a suspicious circumstances, and it could very well be. But don't you think that if they had a suspicious circumstance in a killing and, the guy can't talk for himself or argue, wouldn't you want to try to say, oh, yeah, this is also the Moscow Ripper at the same time?
Right.
That way people don't question why you killed him.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it don't make sense.
Well, and if you're going to, one side is like, well, why would Bryan do this? He's this clean cut, perfect, PhD student who had everything going for him. What reason would he have to do it? And then at the same time, you say, some people will say, well, they're framing Bryan. It's like, that's almost the worst person to choose to frame for this kind of crime. Yeah. Let's choose the guy, who's got who's pursuing criminology, who's trying to be a law enforcement officer, who's such a good person. Let's choose that guy to frame. You can't argue both. And so I think if you're arguing that he's not capable of this crime, like his life was on track, and you're kind of against this idea that he does have issues from the past and his life was, not spiraling out of control and everything was going well, why would law enforcement choose him to set up, right? It almost makes more sense to concede the fact that Bryan does have these underlying issues, that he could be very capable of committing this crime based off of his past. And that's why law enforcement would have chosen Bryan to frame, if you're kind of in that camp, kind of playing devil's advocate, right?
If you have a list of probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people you've arrested over the years, people that maybe have been violent, including one guy that stabbed himself multiple times just after the murder. He stabbed himself.
That guy they arrested.
Attempted to stab his wife. He's actually been convicted of murder. That guy's not good for this. But the PhD student that's not from here and nobody knows who he really is, and that's the guy that they go and face. Now, this is another indication. Like, again, I don't understand why people don't think that times change, technology changes. Sometimes it's not just a few bad apples, a rotten stinking barrel. Check out the 7.5 documentary about NYPD 75th precinct. My man, that happened in the 80s, bro. Like, do you truly think? I mean, that was what? 80s was 40 years ago. Do you think any of those guys are still in the department there? Do you think that what they did in the 1980s is continuing on now? And do you think that what they were able to get away with in the 1980s and the 1990s, that people can get away with now? Mm-hmm. With the technology, body cam footage, cameras recording everywhere, including in your vehicle. I mean, okay.
And I think we agree there can be a rotten barrel. There can, but again, expand, right? So when you talk about the Coburger, we need specifics here. What is going on? You're just kind of, it'd be similar to the prosecution saying he's guilty. Okay, well, why is he guilty? Explain why, right? Tell us the evidence why you think he's guilty. You can't just say he's innocent, they're corrupt. What's going on? What is the corruption? Why, elaborate, tell us what, who's involved here. Is it the FBI in cahoots with Moscow? Is it the Idaho State Police? Who is it? Who's all in cahoots? Elaborate a little bit more on your theory of corruption and this rotten barrel. Who's involved and what are they doing and why?
Yeah, no, you're right, man. You're right. All right. Let's see. I'm going to go through a couple of these before we call it a show. We've been going on for almost 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's always a good time.
If you have any questions, put a couple of stars. If I don't see anything here in a little bit, we're probably going to drop it. I think I already did this, but thank you again.
Hey, Aquarium's a member on my channel as well. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you for following us after. I'm sure you came from True Crime Time, guys. Also, if you haven't or if you're not following True Crime Time, it's in the description. It should be in the title. Let me pull it up real quick. Your page. Oh man, I've put too many dang T's in my website. What do you have coming up next, man, that people can come and check you out at?
So we're going to have a members only live coming up this week. So keep an eye out for that if you're a member and if you want to join. But we're going to be doing some more, I tend to focus on the Coburger case. I am trying to branch out a little bit more, but probably going to talk some more about, so my last couple of videos has delved into the mindset of Bryan and kind of what was going on in his head and just tiptoeing into not necessarily a motive, but just trying to understand what could have been going on and caused him to make that decision that he was going to go through with this murder. I do, I enjoy talking about the trial. I enjoy talking about, is he innocent or guilty? I happen to believe that he's guilty. And one of the things that really fascinates me is understanding other things about the case, like how the crime occurred, why it occurred. And so if you go through some of my videos, a lot of it is talking about that. I like to explore different possibilities on who the target could be. Was it Maddie? Was it Kaylee? Could it have even been Xana or Ethan? My next live, I do want to delve a little bit into the idea of even Xana potentially being a target here. Again, not saying that that's what I've settled on or anything, but I really do like to discuss it with my viewers. So my next video, I am going to explore that angle a little bit, just so that we're looking at it from all sides.
Yeah, well, no, I hear you, man. And I get the, wanting to look at it and be, from all sides. We've done the same, man. At one point, I was kind of 50-50 on whether or not he'd be found guilty. I was like maybe 75% sure he did it. I could never get over the fact that he had, his phone off during the crime. The chances of that happening are slim to none. Yeah. And so that the DNA, and once the DNA came back, that it was 5 octillion his, that told me that was a significant DNA sample. That wasn't, just a small amount. Because if they would have came back 1 in 2 million or 1 in 5 million or 500 million, I still would have been like, man, that's pretty good. But 5 octillion, trillion, or whatever it was,
it's more than the population on Earth,
Yeah, for the last, ever, I think. This is True Crime Times channel. Make sure you go and subscribe. He has 23.2 thousand subscribers. Let's get him up to a little bit more. You can find him if you put in at True Crime Time 007.
Yep.
Hold on, I see this comment. I want to get your reaction to this. So John Doe says the police committed crimes at 11/22. They showed some extreme hatred for those girls. That's motive. Do you recall seeing this extreme hatred?
What police though? Which police? Who had? I mean, the entire department had this extreme hatred toward the girls in this house. No. I think these officers were called to this house for parties all the time, and they're probably annoyed that they're going to the same house and they're talking to these, students about partying, and I'm sure they have better things to do, but I don't necessarily think that's extreme hatred, and they're going to go and number one, murder these 4 students, and number 2, frame Bryan Kohberger. I mean, now you're talking about a hatred toward, now you're essentially saying law enforcement committed the murders. They're not just framing Bryan, but they actually had this hatred toward the victims. I think that's a stretch.
Yeah, well, I have said, I mean, my statement has always been like, there's a difference between somebody who, believes in the court system, innocent until proven guilty, and wants to wait this out, and a difference between a Coburger where it don't matter who it is. It could be the police department. They committed this crime before Bryan Kohberger did. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference, guys. I'm not saying, John Doe, you're a Coburger, but if the shoe fits. No, I'm just kidding, man. I appreciate you being here. You have your comments and stuff. It really does. I don't want to say open my mind to things, but it just kind of lets me know what some folks are thinking as to why they think he's innocent. Well, and I think a lot of it has a predetermination that every law enforcement officer is bad. I've seen some bad ones, but I've seen a lot of great ones. And I don't automatically go into a situation thinking that. I'd like to see evidence of that. I haven't seen evidence of that in this case.
Yeah, I love opposing views and comments, and it's good to talk about it. And like you said, it keeps you on your toes, right? And makes you think. And I think that's why a lot of us are fans of true crime, is the discussion, right? And kind of the banter back and forth and trying to figure it out and sharing our opinions.
100%. Well, I want to thank you, my man, for coming out. Again, this is his channel. Go subscribe, go like, do all those things. I'll be on his channel. We're going to work out the details. So make sure you go and follow and subscribe so you can catch me there. It should be sometime next week.
Yes.
As soon as he puts it out there, I'll put it in the community tab so you guys can know when I'll be on there. So you're going to want to be subscribed to this channel to see the community tab. Also for our members, don't forget, in our community tab, we have a link to our Discord that is just for members only. I'm still working on it. I've got some mods now, and they're helping me out. So I appreciate those guys, Heather, Afton, Sirius. You know who you are. I'm sure I'm missing somebody. And if I am, I apologize. But they're helping me out with that. I'm still trying to get the wife to join it so that she can help me with it. But she's saying no at this time. So you won't see Steelers fan on there yet. But I'm trying to convince her, guys. Well, I appreciate everybody. Hit that like, subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you're still watching this after 2.5 hours and you're not subscribed, I think you're just lying to yourself at this time of
hit the button,
saying you're not a fan. Hit the button, man. Until next time, y'all. Peace.